Hello everyone. While Francesco is looking for my slides, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kriti. I work for Checkpoint, a security engineer based in the UK. The slides today will be focusing on cloud security. We'll also speak about different cloud attacks. My main objective today really is to help you guys understand the type of attacks and trends happening today, so you are able to think and start conceptualizing security at the beginning of any of your cloud projects. So beginning of the journey, mid-journey, wherever you are, that would hopefully help you with your cloud projects. So the main focus would be cloud apps, web API, securing cloud apps, web API, web apps. We'll look at the trends, cloud attacks seen in the field. So what is important to know is what is the market share of cloud security today. And according to Gartner Forrester, there was a research done, and that is worth about 120 billion, and that is just purely security. So it is important to know these things so you know where you stand with security. When it comes to the recent trends and the trending cloud attacks, we've actually noticed, and there's a couple of researches I have done, and also from the top 10 OWASP research. There is the top 3 there, which is men in the cloud malware campaigns, web API attacks, Spectre meltdown, advanced persistent threats, denial of service attacks, microservices concerns. Now, can I ask a quick question? How many of you are heavily involved into security here? Okay, that's great to know. Right, so this will be hopefully hitting the right spot. So men in the cloud, we'll drill down further into that, but men in the cloud would be similar to men in the middle, conceptually, but slightly different on how it works. Cloud malware and cloud campaigns are what I think are, with web API attacks, are the 3 main focus we should be looking into, and it's going to be big for the next few years to come. Spectre and meltdown have made it big in the last few years. The reason why I've mentioned Spectre and meltdown here is because it's actually touch infrastructure. So this is related to AMD, Intel processors, microchips, which were actually vulnerable, and there were exploits which were done to this. The problem with meltdown and Spectre attack, the scale of this was massive, i.e. the cloud impact of any exploitation and vulnerability within the processes would be massive using Spectre and meltdown. So just to give you an overview, Spectre and meltdown, both of them were very highly sophisticated attacks. They targeted mass number of users who were using Intel, AMD core processors, microprocessors, ARM processors. So Spectre really was looking at speculating executable techniques, which is when usually you've got a user who is running a set of system calls to call a certain program on the system. There's a set of binaries which is usually sent during the process call, and that is usually defined and that is known. What Spectre was doing was to guess if there was any other variables which could be added onto the set of binaries, how would the processor respond to that? And I think that was highly sophisticated and very intelligent in the way this was done. Meltdown was similar, but it would target memory leaks. It was actually looking at contents within the memory and then leaked information based on those. So those were the 2 attacks. And the reason, again, when I'm mentioning these 2 is because these 2 are infrastructure-based. And you'll come to know in my future slides why is it I'm mentioning these and infrastructure-based, purely because, again, the cloud environment is not yours. It belongs to someone else. But on your own environment, you've got your perimeter devices, you're protecting your devices, you've got your own assets protected using your own security policies, but that's not possible in the cloud. You have to rely on someone else to patch in the cloud. So hopefully we'll come down and we'll look into the other slides about more into Spectre and Meltdown. The next one I thought, which was again very important, was APT, so Advanced Persistent Threats. So these are usually state-sponsored attacks. Big example of that would be Stuxnet and Hydrack. If I don't know if you're familiar with Stuxnet here, but there's a very long story behind it, and I'm happy to have a chat with you over coffee later on with the Stuxnet story, conscious of time. So these usually, the APTs are usually state-sponsored attacks and are really to find information, cause damage, again, the same general analytics with attacks. DOS is going a little bit less sort of more going downhill at the moment, so we don't really see much of DOS attack. And I think a lot of it is due to sheer scale of auto-scaling of cloud. So the fact that you can auto-scale cloud, so there isn't much DOS attack, but it's still there. So DOS attack really is to cause loss of information and impact availability. And then again, I've mentioned microservices concerns, but this is really not a recent attack or a cloud. However, it is something to bear in mind when you're preparing security for your microservices. So let's take a look into this picture. Can I have anyone guess why did I put this picture in here? Conscious is end of day, it's very tiring. That is not too far from that. So the point was, I heard it a few days ago, and I very, very, very often hear this. Not every cloud has a silver lining. So let's have a look at why not every cloud has a silver lining. And that's because there is a man in the cloud shadowing that silver lining. So looking at man in the cloud, here is the top type of attack. And this is, in my opinion, something we all have to bear in mind and then understand why is multi-factor authentication so important. Man in the cloud works with, say for example, you've got a user who's trying to access some sort of information over the web. User has to access the web server. How does it do that? We use normally a username and a password, static, okay? And then access is, okay, this is a web server and I have to access this. I will use my phone to access that web server. Right, I'm at home now, I've got access to my laptop, I'll use the web server to access the same information. And that is part of how devices and users are operating and accessing web apps today. So man in the cloud sits effectively in the middle, similar to man in the middle, except that man in the cloud is sitting on the same platform as the victim on the same platform. So Dropbox, Google Drive, Office 365, Salesforce, etc. Man in the cloud mostly affects file sharing, file storage types of application. Anyone in file storage application here in the cloud? No? Oh, that's good. Okay, so looking at file storage, what happens then once a user entered the username and password and enters that to feed into the web server to authenticate itself, it obtains a token synchronization session in return. That token synchronization session is one which can be renewed, which can be used, which can also be reused. And this is where the vulnerability lies, because men in the middle, men in the cloud, will sit there, sniff at WebSockets if it's open, try to do a two-step type attacks to gain that information access, to have access to that security token session, obtain that, reuse that from a different location, from a different device, tamper your file storage, copy your file storage across somewhere else, do really naughty things on your cloud, proprietary stuff. But it's there, and many often it goes unnoticed. And this is where, not the beauty, but the opposite of the beauty lies of how this attack happens. So the point here is the security, the cloud synchronization session is the key. And this could be avoided if there was enough, say, for example, multi-factor authentication or something which could check, again, where this user is connecting from, or restricting the access, or have the user use another auth token to authenticate itself when trying to connect from a different location. So what was interesting in Men in the Cloud was Slack. Anyone use Slack before? Heavily? Okay. So a few years ago, Slack was actually compromised with this attack. What happened in Slack is that there was the victim on the same platform, the attacker on the same platform. People were generally sharing files, downloading files, doing all sorts of things with files on Slack. What the attacker then did was to find a way to compromise the victim. So few ways of doing that: social engineering, or finding ways to deliver a phishing link which could potentially go back and download a malware in the background, or simply just sending an attachment, and I'm sure we all receive those in our Hotmail accounts, tax invoices. Don't we? Tax invoices, which we think is something very important, and I should be trusting it because it came from HMRC, and I should be opening that. So some people who are not aware, without being too patronizing here, but some people who are not aware about this risk associated with opening any attachment would very easily open the attachment. Once the attachment is downloaded, there is a hidden malware which is downloaded in the background without the user knowing or seeing what is happening in the background. And there you go, that's a compromise. Once this is compromised, what happened in Slack was the attacker was able to change the download settings of where Slack downloads the file and changed it to its username account from the Slack account to download all the files across to the other user. And that was a vulnerability in Slack which attackers found out and exploited. So that was an example of Slack. So the next one which we are meant to speak to according to the cloud trends is Cloud Malware Campaign, Cloud Fanta, and Cloud Squirrel. So the common thing about these attacks at the moment, which I'm seeing, is that Cloud Fanta, Cloud Squirrel, they all use two-step techniques. It's not just one step anymore. It's not just a DDoS, right? I'll just leave TCP connections half open and then DOS the service and reduce availability. It is usually in two steps attack. So either send a compromised link, either send an attachment, and have a malware downloaded and file compromised. So the intention is really to steal your data, to compromise your data, to cause financial loss, and just really make the brand go downhill. And that leads us to speak about web attack surfaces. Now, why is this important? And in some respect, I actually thank Dan earlier for making my life a little bit easier to explain this. So Dan mentioned about web API, and someone at the back there, I can't really see right now, asked a question about API security and why this is so important. So if you actually look at this screen, you'd see that web APIs are being used everywhere. Everything is being run as a service. So you've got testing as a service, compliance as a service, software as a service. They are all ingrained and working together as multiple components. So Kubernetes, containers, Docker securities, they are all using web APIs in the background. The big question then is, what if web APIs themselves can create a backdoor entry into your system? What if those web APIs can be compromised? As you can see, it can. Why not? So the zero trust model is there, and why should you be trusting the API in the background? So with this in mind, what Checkpoint did as a research in the last few years is to look at multiple payloads from different ways users were compromised. What we then did was to look into the common variables within the attack language. So for example, the use of apostrophe, the use of single quote, the use of single quote x equal x. If those were found in the common attack, they were categorized as indicators And once those indicators were found, and depending on how they were combined with all the other variables, we did a scoring system for those type of common attack variables in attack languages. So API attacks are categorized between many, 3 different layers, effectively: a pre-login, a post-login, and an API foundational security. So I'll just quickly mention this, that pre-login and post-login are related to login botnet attacks. Post-login are data application layer attacks. And then again, you've got rate limiting, i.e. how many connection sessions are you allowing at a particular time. And so henceforth, with the API protection, you've got the pre-login protection, post-login protection, and API foundational security protection, rate limiting. So an example of an SQL attack. So guys, SQL attack is very, very common. And the fact that we are using web APIs for everything, and the fact that everyone's uploading database, front-end, back-end services into the cloud, the SQL injection is becoming very, very, very common. And this is just a very simple example to show how easy it is to actually push a SQL injection attack once you know what to do. The tools are there, and they're available to make this attack happen. So the previous example showed one example of inserting apostrophe to identify how we can obtain information from a SQL database. The second slide, this slide which follows, is actually showing that the tools are available. So when you think from an attacker's mindset, the attacker will not just simply send one apostrophe with admin and try to see what happens. It will have a whole dictionary of attacks to send using a zap tool, for example, at one time. The current, so one of the arguments anyone could use at this point is that, right, I've got a WAF, and my WAF is doing this, and we're doing input validation. Yes, that's absolutely fine. However, we have noticed lately that a WAF, by the way, Checkpoint doesn't have a WAF product yet. So what Checkpoint noticed was many of the WAF products do not actually look and check for apostrophe as potentially a vulnerability. The reason is because apostrophe could cause a lot of false positive, and hence the reason why it hasn't been included. So just to bear this in mind, so there is bypasses they could use, and one of the bypass is to encode that apostrophe into ASCII encoded string, which is the %27, and then identify the information based on those. And once that yields an error, it tells the attacker, right, this is done. I have got the information what I need, and then from here, I can go further and then continue attacking. So what Checkpoint is saying is, obviously I'm Checkpoint biased, there is 2-stage enforcement onto how you can do input validation. One is, again, your input validation, sanitizing all the data which are coming into your web APIs, but at the second time, use advanced engine analysis to look into things like user reputation, payload score, URL score, parameter score, and from there, from those information, you could, it would be easier to decide whether to block that attack or allow the attack. So this was an example of the SQL example with Zap tool and how you can use the Checkpoint WAP with to block these type of attacks. So the WAF solution today, I think, available is Mod Security, Azure, Akamai, Cloudflare, and then there's Imperva, Radware. So with web application API control, we talk about web application protection, we talk about API security, and there's also bot mitigation. So you remember from one of my previous slides, I spoke about pre-login checks, and on my previous slide, I also spoke about user reputation. So what we're looking at is building a user reputation engine, and then from there doing further analysis into, based on what we have learned, whether if that type of attack is true or not true, or it's malicious file or not. So that leads us to talking about how do you go about selecting security for web API. Of course, prevention is key. Make sure whichever security vendor you choose, you're going to have prevention as opposed to just simply detection. Being accurate is key, and being able to automate. Again, I'd thank Dan for this, because again, Kubernetes, Docker, container security, it's so agile that it is absolutely, in my opinion, difficult to manage. Anyone in your account, given the right permission, can go as a DevOps, given the right access, deploy a service somewhere which no one would know about. How do you go about securing that? How do you even know in real time, instantly, that that particular instance occurred, and you need to apply the correct security into that, and it has to be managed as well. So combine the solution with openness, flexibility, management, automation, that would be key. Now let's take a look at the question we had earlier about security. So what Checkpoint is saying, again, Checkpoint biased, is that going in the future, the security would be very different to how we apply security today. And what we are saying is we will provide security as a function. Again, security as a function, which means that WAP would be ingrained into the workload. So when you're deploying your apps, you're deploying a container, you're deploying a service, you're deploying the security ingrained into that. So these are going to be agents, which you could very well have running onto your Nginx, for example, or a Tomcat server, or a Node. And this is how we plan to build security for the cloud. And this is currently a product which is in EA at the moment, and probably going GA in a couple of months. So again, what is key is the fact that, yes, you've got security, yes, you've got some assets, but how do you manage them? Do you actually know if where they are set? How do they sit? How are they been deploying? Looking at container security in the cloud, in the public cloud, how do you manage those? How are people, your DevOps team, for example, when they're pushing policies, are they pushing the right policy? Are they pushing the right configuration in the cloud? Is it hardened enough to give enough protection to everyone? So the next big thing, and at the moment in the field, I'm having a lot of talks about this. It is called Dome 9, and it provides security in the cloud. So what Dome 9 does is it looks into the cloud compliance. It works in real time. It looks at containers. It looks at services. Anything you literally would be deploying in the cloud would be known immediately. And the beauty of that is it integrates into multi-clouds. So you could have a one Dome 9 account, but it will connect to AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and from there, as soon as a new instance or a new service is spinned up, it is added into your asset database. So Dome 9 allows asset discovery, and it will also do services discovery, so microservices, and at the same time, it will provide enough management configuration and also hardening for a DevOps to have security ingrained right from the beginning as soon as this particular service is spinned up. And this is what we're saying about configuration management. This is something you could configure, very easy to do, and also have compliance. So if any of you here have to adhere with particular governance and security compliance, you could have that security compliance again called in to Dome 9, and it will scan all your assets to tell you whether if those assets are compliant to that particular security regulations or not. This is, again, a CloudGuard family. So there's, as I said, there's a lot of different backdoors entry, different ways we are deploying services, assets in the cloud. So it is important to know where are you deploying which security. And to end this presentation, my key takeaways for you would be, when you are working with security, it is very important to understand the mindset of an attacker so you can secure your assets very well right from the beginning. And that, what will that give you is reduced operational overhead later on, It'll give you visibility, it'll give you better control. You'd be able to tell and have reports and know what is going on within your cloud assets, just as you do in your perimeter devices. So make DevOps security inclusive. Make sure that the security is preventative, it's precise, accurate, fully automated, orchestrated with everything you're pushing into the cloud and known to you in real time. And happy to talk to you again later on over any questions you'd have. Happy to take them as well now. Thank you.